The time is now for the Dr. Bob Sports Show. I am Tanner. I am our head of analytics, and for the past 7 years, I've been working alongside Bob, originating our NFL and college basketball bets. And today, as always, I'm joined by our digital media specialist, Grant. Another loss for your Chiefs last week.
That was awful to watch. I mean, I really can't stand how this team is playing right now. I can't stand how they look, but this is actually what is going to lead us into our first segment, and that is where we will be grading the scriptwriters and how they did for episode 13 of this NFL season. And let's look into that Green Bay huge win on Monday night. The Packers are now minus 250 to make the playoffs after beating the Chiefs.
Yeah, I mean, Green Bay's offense averaged 0.28 EPA per play. That ranks third among Week 13 offenses. They got at least 2 first downs on every drive against that solid Chiefs defense. And Jordan Love had a career high 14.7 EPA on his dropbacks, and it came from play action. He's threw for over 100 yards on play action for the third straight game. But I don't know if he's going to have enough time for those long developing play action plays this week against Wink Martindale's defense.
Yeah, so you think the Giants are going to be able to disrupt Jordan Love this week?
Well, that's kind of the thesis that I'm going under, which is basically the Giants have the second highest blitz rate in the league, and Jordan Love has not been as good against the blitz this year. He's 28th against the blitz compared to how he's done against a standard pass rush. And then you look at it, they lost starting wide receiver Christian Watson, who has got another hamstring injury. They were already without starting tight end Luke Musgrave. So I just don't know that those remaining receivers for Green Bay are going to be able to win early enough in the route against this, aggressive man blitzing defense, especially on third downs. I mean, you look at Jordan Love's yards per attempt against man coverage is only 64% of his yards per attempt against zone. That's 31st in the league. And New York's defense has the third highest man coverage rate in the NFL. So the only real saving grace I can see for the Packers offense, at least in this current iteration, this kind of play action heavy offense, is that the Giants pass rush will take a hit if nose tackle Dexter Lawrence can't play. He's worth 1.2 points according to our metrics, the best player on that New York defense. So if he's out Monday night, maybe that helps the Packers on those longer developing plays. But if he's in, I think this is kind of the end of the road for this Jordan Love play action heavy offense.
All right, well, let's shift it over to our next segment, and we've got our free bet of the week. And we sent out a 2-star bet on the New York Jets +6 on Tuesday.
Yeah, and the market's moved on our release, and it's come down even further since. But I still think there's value at +3.5, and that would be a 1-star best bet.
Does this have anything to do with the waiving of Tim Boyle?
I mean, yeah, I don't think we would have bet the Jets if Boyle was under center. I mean, it turns out a terrible college quarterback makes for an even worse NFL quarterback. Who could have predicted? And Boyle will average 0.06 less EPA per play than Zach Wilson. So it's safe to say the offense will be upgrading with the switch back to Wilson. And we know what the Jets are with Zach Wilson. We have plenty of sample size to see that. They were -1 net yards per play before he got benched this season due to that amazing defense they have. And last year they were +2 net yards per play, with Wilson. And so we know this team is, around average. I think they're a little bit below average with Zach Wilson starting. And I know it's been a really disappointing season after all the Aaron Rodgers hype this summer, but I just think it's extremely hard to make the case that the Texans are more than a field goal favorite on the road against just this slightly below average Jets team.
Yeah, how do you think Zach Wilson's going to fare this week?
Well, I think, it's going to be wet and windy in the Meadowlands. So first of all, that negates Houston's advantage in the passing attack. And Wilson will be able to rely on that screen game that he's been working all season. I mean, Breece Hall is third in yards per route run among running backs, and the Texans are 26th in EPA per target allowed to running backs. So I think the screens will be able to get going on Sunday.
Yeah, we've seen Stroud. He's been pretty great all year, but this Jets defense has been able to give even the best of the best a lot of troubles.
Yeah, and they have a favorable matchup against Stroud, who's done most of his damage versus the blitz. And he's a little bit worse when opposing defenses drop 7 into coverage, which the Jets do at a league high 85% rate. So Stroud's yards per attempt against a standard pass rush is only 89% of his yards per attempt against the blitz. That's 26 in the league. The other thing to note is that Houston's offensive line will be without starting left guard Titus Howard, as well as center Jared Patterson, who ranks 8th in pass blocking efficiency. And that is bad news because New York interior defender Quinnen Williams is 7th in pressures. He's the best player on that Jets defense outside of Sauce Gardner. So I think there's going to be a ton of collapsing pockets this week for CJ Stroud.
Yeah, and does that Tank Dell injury change how you feel about this passing attack?
I do. I think that's massive. I mean, defenses were devoting a ton of attention to Tank Dell. The rookie saw single coverage on only 29% of his routes. That's the 4th fewest in the league. That means defenses were always devoting extra attention to Dell. And despite that, he averaged 0.40 EPA per target, 13th in the league. I mean, that's really hard to imagine for a rookie to be that effective, given he was getting that much attention. But now he's out for the season due to that fractured fibula. It's crazy that he was in on that, goal line play. Why is Tank Dell blocking on the goal line? He's one of the smallest players in the league. But regardless, what that opened up for was Nico Collins, who had a career high 43% target rate on his routes, and he accounted for 57% of Houston's air yards with Dell's sideline. But I mean, the Jets, they've got all-pro cornerback Sauce Gardner, 6th in yards per cover snap allowed, to take out Nico Collins. So I don't know. I just really think that this game should be around pick. That's where our model has it. And I think the Jets are value at anything above a field goal here.
All right, well, we just touched on that Tank Dell injury, but let's switch it over to the injury watch. And it looks like the Jaguars could be in trouble as they caught the injury bug last week.
Yeah, so Trevor Lawrence is the big one. We don't know if he's out. Probably is out, but we did see Patrick Mahomes play through a high ankle sprain in the playoffs last season. Obviously, those were more high leverage games, so the Chiefs might have pushed him forward. And if it was a regular season, he might have sat out. So it could be C.J. Beathard, who our metrics indicate is 4.7 points worse than Lawrence. Now, the other thing that happened on the Jaguars offense is they lost left tackle Walker Little, who we actually talked about a little bit in last week's podcast. And if he's out, that is going to be bad news. Jacksonville's offensive line, it's averaged just 7.5 pressures allowed during the first 11 games, but they let up 17 pressures last week. And that was because, were already without Cam Robinson. So they bumped Walker Little out to left tackle, but now you're down to your 3rd string left tackle. And this week, that's terrible because Myles Garrett lines up against left tackles. So that is bad for the offense. And it gets worse because they also are going to be without Christian Kirk, who's one of 19 qualifying wide receivers to average at least 2 yards per route run. So just awful news for the Jaguars offense, not to mention nickelback Trey Herndon is also going to be out this week.
Yeah, that's not looking good for the Jags right now, but the Vikings are finally getting back their star, Justin Jefferson. How's this going to impact their passing game moving forward?
Well, I mean, it turns this receiving core into one of the best in the NFL, which is good news for Josh Dobbs, who's coming off that terrible Monday nighter before the bye. You get Justin Jefferson suiting up for his first game since week 5 alongside TJ Hawkinson and Jordan Addison, who's been a breakout rookie in Jefferson's absence. Addison is 20th in EPA per target among wide receivers. Now, we look at what we might see from Jefferson in this game. He was 9th in yards per route run from the slot before he got hurt, and he will have a favorable matchup on the inside this week as Raiders nickelback Nate Hobb is 30th out of 31 qualifying nickelbacks in yards per cover snap allowed in the slot. So I think Jefferson kind of lines up on the inside, maybe on at least a third, maybe half his route this week. We see Addison on the outside, and then TJ Hawkinson will have a good matchup as well, as the Raiders are 28th in success rate allowed to tight ends. So I kind of like the way this Vikings offense is shaping up the rest of the season. We know Josh Dobbs can be functional. They've got a top receiving core, a solid offensive line, and they should put up points the rest of the way.
All right, well, let's shift it over to our next segment. We've got Public Opinion Talk with me, and we had another great weekend of football, and the public was firing away with their hot takes. But this week, everyone thinks that Jake Browning is him.
I mean, that was a huge surprise Monday night. And I know we talked about how we thought that the Bengals season was over. And then Jake Browning comes out and he averages 8.8 yards per pass play. And he completed all 7 of his attempts with 10 plus air yards against the Jaguars. I mean, he's out there looking like one of the best quarterbacks in the league. Now, obviously, you can't, extrapolate too much from a one game sample size, but they did have a 52% success rate last Monday night, ranking 3rd among week 13 offenses.
Yeah, do you think Browning's going to be able to keep Cincinnati's postseason hopes alive this week? I mean, they're playing the Colts. The market has them listed at plus 750 to make the playoffs.
Well, I do. I mean, the Bengals are known for their wide receiving core because they got T. Higgins and Jamar Chase out there. And we've been railing on this all year on the Colts defense, but they have a huge hole on that defense with Juju Brents likely out again, leaving 3rd string cornerback Darrell Baker on the field. And Jalen Jones has been a great addition for the Colts. I mean, he's performing incredibly as a rookie, 16th in yards per cover snap allowed, but that still means when you got Higgins and Chase, that one of them is likely going to be lined up across from Baker on every snap. But the problem for Browning is he's probably not going to have a ton of time because left guard Cordell Volson is clearly the worst player on that Bengals offensive line, and he'll line up right across from the Colts' best pass rusher, interior defender, DeForest Buckner, who has 37 pressures this year. And the other thing to note is the Colts will be getting back interior defender Grover Stewart to start alongside Buckner. Stewart has been out since week 7, but he has a 9.9% run stop in the first 6 weeks of the season. That's 15th among interior defenders. So when you've got, Stewart out there to stop the run and Buckner as a pass rusher, that's where the strength of this Colts defense is. So it could be a problem for Cincinnati's offense this week.
Yeah, I think the one thing I took away from that game is that Joe Burrow is clearly just a system quarterback. Anyone can do it in that offense. No, I'm kidding.
That's a very Kansas City take of you.
I'm kidding. But let's move it over to our stock up, stock down. And whose stock are you going to be buying this week?
All right, well, I'm buying the Baltimore ground game. As conditions get worse here in December and January, football, I could see the Ravens really leaning into the ground game, especially with Mark Andrews out. And it's worth noting the Ravens already lead the NFL in EPA per rush, but I think they could get even better and lean even more into the ground game, especially with the emergence of running back Keaton Mitchell, who has gained 4.5 yards per carry after contact the last 5 weeks. That's 3rd in the NFL. So if you've got one of the most dynamic running backs in the league next to Lamar Jackson, this all of a sudden becomes an extremely dangerous ground game, even more so than they already have leading the NFL. I think they can improve on that if they go with a ton of snaps with Mitchell and Lamar. And you can bring Gus Edwards in at the goal line if you want a little bit more power. But between the 20s, I really like the looks they're getting with Mitchell. And the run game will set up those play action shots from offensive coordinator Todd Monken. And I think Lamar will have time to drop back in the pocket this week in those play action shots because Baltimore's interior offensive line is the strength of that O-line. They have allowed the 2nd fewest pressures this season, and they will limit Donald, who can't really line up across from any of Simpson, Zeitler, or Linderbaum.
All right. Well, whose stock are you going to be selling this week?
I'm going to sell the 49ers stock because I think this is the high point for them. They're rated now 2.5 points better than any team in the market in the NFL, which is extremely rare. That happens, maybe once every 5 or 6 years. It's very rare that a team would be this much higher than every other team. And the reason I'm skeptical that they're that much higher is because they've gained all that ground in the last couple of weeks. I mean, you've got to remember that Seattle closed +7 against San Francisco on Thanksgiving, and the flip in home field with divisional familiarity is only worth 2 points by our metrics. So that means the 49ers were being upgraded quite a bit after beating the Seahawks and Eagles, and improving by that much in a span of just 2 games this late in the season is highly unlikely unless there's a change at quarterback or a huge cluster injury, something along those lines. So I'm selling the idea that the 49ers are 2.5 points better than every other team in the league.
All right. Well, let's shift over to our DraftKings player of the slate. And last week, you spent up for Tyreek Hill, who went 5 for 157 and 2 touchdowns. What do you have lined up for us this week?
Well, yeah. Last week we spent up. This week we're spending down. And I've talked to you
Very.
about this in the group text, but I believe in Marquez Valdez-Scantling. I believe. And he's listed at only 3,000. That's the lowest price you can be listed at on DraftKings. And he has the most routes of any wide receivers in a Patrick Mahomes offense. So he doesn't have to clear a huge bar to justify this price. And he had a season high 5 targets last week. And we know, he had a chance to catch that huge bomb at the end that was clearly pass interference. If there wasn't pass interference, he might have caught that, brought it in for a score. And that would have already, just one catch would have justified this low price. And I think that the Chiefs know he needs to be a major player for this offense to function correctly. I mean, he has the 6th highest cap hit on the teams. And in DFS tournaments, we're looking for guys with a massive ceiling, which we know he's capable of, even at this low price. I mean, he had 116 yards and a touchdown in the AFC Championship earlier this year. He had 84 yards and a touchdown against the Chargers. And Patrick Mahomes is going to have to go somewhere with the ball. And the Bills, they're 8th against tight ends this year. Bills nickelback Taron Johnson, 3rd in yards per cover snap allowed in the slot. So I think, it's going to be tough sledding for Travis Kelce and Rashee Rice this week. So, Mahomes probably going to scramble a little bit more than usual on Sunday. And he's also just going to have to find MVS deep, because I think the Chiefs are going to get to around, 23, 24 points in this game. That's certainly what the market is implying. So I could see a big game in that, 84 and a touchdown range that we saw from MVS in week 8 or in week 7 this week. And if you get that for someone listed at 3,000, that is a huge boon for anyone playing in DFS tournaments.
As the Chiefs homer on the podcast, I hope you are right with that one. But let's shift it over to our next segment. We've got the weather of the week. What are you seeing out there?
Well, we've definitely got wet conditions in Baltimore and at the Meadowlands, but I want to focus on the Lions and Bears in this segment because, this game will be significantly different than what we saw just 3 weeks ago when Chicago went into Detroit as a 9-point underdog with a total of 48. And now we're seeing the Bears as kind of a cheap 3 and a total of 44 at the time of this recording. And that's because we're seeing, the game going from being played in a dome in Detroit to a cold weather game on grass at Soldier Field, windy out there. Jared Goff, in the cold weather and the elements has not been good throughout his career. And it's worth noting that the Bears are 21-13 straight up, 20-13-1 against the spread at home after week 10 versus dome and warm weather teams. It's tough for teams that are used to playing in great conditions to go to Soldier Field on that tundra and come out with wins late in the year. So that's something to monitor, and we've certainly seen the Lions and the under take money this week.
All right. I like that. Well, let's shift it over to our next segment. We've got our Sunday night primetime preview, and we've got the Philadelphia Eagles at the Dallas Cowboys. And last week, the Cowboys stuck by that pesky Seattle team, but the Eagles suffered a beatdown in their NFC Championship rematch from last year.
Yeah, I mean, they lost. Their 23-point loss to the 49ers last week was the worst in the Jalen Hurts era. And now, the Eagles will be looking to bounce back because they're getting guys back. First, tight end Dallas Goedert, who's 5th in EPA per target among tight ends. He'll be back on the field this week. They're also likely getting starting linebacker Zach Cunningham back, and they would have loved to have him against the 49ers because Kyle Shanahan puts linebackers in a torture chamber, but Cunningham will at least be back for them this week. And they signed former All-Pro linebacker Shaquille Leonard, too. So they know they have a hole in the middle of the defense, and they're looking to address that hole, and then, getting Goddard back will be huge for them as well.
Yeah, I like the Leonard signing, but how much better can they be with both these guys back on the field?
Well, yeah, so Philadelphia's defense, 25th in success rate allowed to tight ends, and that could be a problem. Jake Ferguson's had a solid year for Dallas. He's 6th in EPA per target. And Leonard's not really known for being a coverage linebacker, but I certainly think he'll be an upgrade on what they've had. Just getting getting Cunningham back will be important for them as well. So, can the Eagles go from bad to mediocre against tight ends? That can make a noticeable difference on this defense that has already some pretty good cornerbacks.
All right, well, how's the Cowboys O-line going to match up against the Eagles this week?
Well, On the left side, it's looking pretty strong. I mean, you look at left tackle Tyron Smith. He leads all tackles in pass blocking efficiency. Left guard Tyler Smith leads, or is third in pass blocking efficiency among guards. So I think those two guys are going to limit Josh Sweat and Jalen Carter, who both had pretty solid seasons for the Eagles. But the Cowboys need to be worried about right tackle Terrence Steele, who ranks 46th in pass blocking efficiency out of 52 qualifying tackles against Hassan Reddick, who's 12th in pressures. So I kind of feel like, Dak's blind side will be protected this week. And then, it could be a big day for Hassan Reddick on the other side.
Are you expecting Dak to just keep feeding CD this week?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's been the basis of their offense, right? I mean, CD's fourth in EPA per target this year, but a lot of that damage CD has done is in the slot. And Philadelphia nickelback Bradley Roby is allowing only 0.57 yards per cover snap allowed in the slot. So I don't know. I kind of feel like Dak's going to have to go elsewhere with the ball this week, or they'll just kind of have to get CD in some motions to kind of just avoid him matching up one-on-one with Roby in the slot, because that's a place that the Eagles have thrived with Roby on the field.
All right. I feel like the Eagles' biggest concern is if they're going to be able to contain Parsons this week.
Yeah, and that was a shift that we saw Dan Quinn do last time these two teams played. So, Parsons, he leads the NFL with 78 pressures, but that's mostly across from right tackles. And we know Eagles, the great all-pro right tackle Lane Johnson. But the last time the Cowboys played the Eagles, Parsons rushed off the opposite edge on 71% of his snaps. So, and he had 6 pressures and 2 sacks against the Eagles. So I think they're probably just going to do that again, right? Move Parsons to the other side across from Jordan Mailata instead of Lane Johnson. And we've seen Mailata struggle recently. He surrendered 21 pressures in the last 4 games after allowing 21 pressures in the first 8 games of the season. So, that could be a problem for the Eagles. And I think that the Cowboys are sharp enough to move Parsons into an easier matchup for him.
All right, well, I've kind of been waiting to hear what you have to say about DaRon Bland's season. I mean, he's been an absolute ball hawk, but he does have that tough matchup this week.
Right. I mean, leading the NFL with 8 interceptions, already set the NFL record with pick sixes this year, but he's gotten beat. We saw it last week in that route against DK Metcalf, and he's allowing 1.31 yards per cover snap. That's 69th among cornerbacks. Not very good. It kind of reminds me of that first season from Trayvon Diggs when when everyone was saying that he was extremely good, but he was so leaky. He was just getting picks. He was gambling way too much. Now Diggs, before the injury was turning into a really good cornerback. And we could see that from Bland as well. But for now, Bland is definitely liable to leak an explosive play across from A.J. Brown or Devonta Smith. I mean, Brown has forced 17 missed tackles, 5th among wide receivers. So he could have one of those, slant routes that we saw just like DK last week. Maybe Brown gets on a slant, breaks tackle from Bland, and he's off to the races. Or we could see a go ball to Devonta Smith. He has 9 receptions on passes with 20 plus air yards. That's 9th in the league. So I would be worried about Bland if I was a Cowboys fan this week, even though he's had some electric pick sixes this year. But overall, you look at the side and total in this game. Our model's right around market here. We favor the Cowboys by 3.9 with a predicted total of 52.8.
All right. Well, last week you had Jaden Reed over 3.5 receptions. He hit that. But what do you got for the primetime prop this week?
Primetime prop this week, we're going to go with DeAndre Swift over 50.5 rushing yards. So after that embarrassing loss last week at home, the Eagles, they had just 46 rushing yards, and the offensive coordinator, Brian Johnson, came out and said, we got to do a better job. Part of it's finding balance of patience, and we got to continue hammering attempts, getting guys in good rhythm and good flow. So that indicates to me they're going to pound the rock this week, regardless of it's successful or not. And that actually might not be the wrong strategy. The Cowboys are the only defense in the NFL allowing a higher rushing success rate at 43.7% than a dropback success rate at 43.1%. I mean, we know that passing is more effective in the NFL, but against the Cowboys, running has been more effective, which is very rare. I mean, I can't actually remember a defense that has been the case. So Brian Johnson might be onto something this week. And we know the Eagles have one of the best ground games in the NFL. So I could see a ton of attempts for DeAndre Swift, and he'll get over that, 50.5 rushing yard mark.
All right. I like it. Well, I think that will do it for the podcast this week. If you're looking for more content, head over to drbobsports.com, where you'll find all of Bob's college football write-ups for bowl season. And please go ahead, leave us a thumbs up if you're enjoying the content, and we'll be back next Friday to talk week 15 of the NFL.